Okay, well, we will please have a seat and we will get started in just a moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't talk right now, I'm working.
Hi. They're quiet.
Okay, we're going to begin. Good morning, I'm Robert Maschke, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's middle session, which is Street Smart Studios, Laboratories for Ideas and Concepts. This is a very interesting topic for me because I basically started my architectural practice experimenting in the Gordon Square neighborhood of Cleveland starting in 1998 and have not stopped experimenting. We have a dynamic panel this morning of really engaged creative leadership that have worked in many of the neighborhoods that are starting to make a name for themselves. And I'm not going to go over their bios because I'd rather hear them talk to you and interact. So their bios are in the yellow program. But we have artist, multimedia artist, Donald Black Jr. We have the executive director of Northeast Shores, which is, people know as the Waterloo neighborhood, which is Brian Friedman. From Land Studio, Tiffany Graham. President and CEO of CPAC, Tom Shorble. Artist, sculptor, Olga Zimska, sorry. And we have the Honorable Matt Zone, who is Councilman of Ward 15. So I'll start by engaging the panel. Hopefully there'll be a dialogue between the panel. And as you have questions, please come up and I'll try to bring you into the conversation. So Tom, I want to start off with you. You've been involved not only in Northeast Ohio, but you've been involved outside of Ohio in many different arts programs. And you've seen kind of the rise of how arts have been a catalyst for change. Where do the communities, the neighborhoods, the cities stand in relationship to other places around the country? Are we following or are we leading?
I think we're unique. Each community is going to have a different approach in terms of their arts and cultural ideas and concepts, either private or public sector. I think in terms of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County is that there is a real sense that the arts and cultural sector is not on the periphery of the community or the community revitalization or community development, but they're actually in the middle. They're working with other types of sector building groups, community development corporations, government service organizations, certainly education, public and private, and I think based on the earlier discussion, I think there is a strong advocacy group. It could be a lot stronger, and it should be a lot stronger, but I do see that a number of individual artists, and particularly I think in terms of visual art, are using their skills and their talents to communicate issues that exist in this community. Whereas I don't necessarily see that in other communities. I think that the individual artists in this community are looking towards the legacy of neighborhoods that exist in cities that are commonly known as Rust Belt cities, and are working with community development corporations and their elected officials to turn that around. And certainly Collinwood is a great example of that. So I think we need to look at where are we intersecting as the arts and cultural sector, whether it's arts and cultural organizations or individual artists, with other parts of our community that are important to us. And I'll give you one example. I think that is maybe emblematic of being involved. This was about 7 years ago, and there was a Health and Human Services levy that was coming on the ballot. And at that time, we had the county commission as opposed to the county council. And 3 commissioners were pretty concerned that this issue was not going to pass. The polls were not good around the Health and Human Services issue passing. And so the Community Partnership Arts and Culture, we do these arts and cultural roundtables, which many of you who are out in the audience attend. And one of the things that we said, we always say that we're important to quality of life. The arts and cultural sector is important to quality of life. Arts and cultural organizations, and that's true. But we also, in that meeting, discussed the fact that the health and human services community is important to the quality of life. And in many aspects, it's just helping people come up to a standard of quality in living through the health and human services sector. So we suggested to the group, let's raise some money for this campaign. And let's go out and canvass and campaign for this in the neighborhood. The evening of that election, we passed by about 3 or 4 points. And one of the county commissioners, by the way, we did that. We raised about $15,000, not just from arts and cultural organizations, but from individual artists. Individual artists went out and canvassed in their neighborhoods and promoted this. And there were curtain speeches at arts and cultural organizations. Anyhow, it passed, and one of the commissioners got up and said, this is a great day, we squeaked by, and he said, I'm almost sure that one of those percentage points that put us over the top is because of the arts and cultural sector. Now, back to your question. I don't know of too many communities, Cleveland size or larger, where the arts and cultural sector will come together around public issues and support them as a group. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, let me change gears, and let's go down to the artist. So Donald, not many people may be familiar with your work, but I'm not saying that you.
If you're not, please go to Zygote. Donald had an opening last night at Zygote Galleries, and it is outstanding. Sorry, I had to put that in. I said I was finished talking, but clearly I'm not.
No, and where I'm going with that question is, we have a grassroots artist who's really taken upon himself over the last decade or so and has really persevered to win competitions and be recognized. And you have an alternative entrepreneurial approach to promoting your art, and I'd like you to maybe discuss that, because I think a lot of people can learn from it.
I'm kind of curious to know what approach you're speaking of.
Well, so you
conversation you want me to say.
Well, you don't necessarily, you do not work in a typical gallery artist situation. You kind of worked in a consortium of artists that are self-promoted.
Good.
Okay, so I moved back to Cleveland 6 years ago. And when I moved back to Cleveland, I felt like, okay, well, I lived in New York for 5 years, and I started to really want to figure out what I wanted to say with my work. And I said, maybe I should move back to Cleveland. And actually, I got a phone call from CPAC. It was a kind of cold phone call. Came to town, talked to Tom Shorter. We had a conversation about a lot of things that were going to be happening in Cleveland. And I was thinking, wow, maybe it's more important for me to be making work. And when I moved back to Cleveland, I started to show this work that I'm extremely excited about. And it talked about me and where I'm from, and it showed people who look like me. And the response to the work seemed to be, can you show me something that, my collectors might want to buy? So ultimately, in my experience in Cleveland, or back in Cleveland, has been a roller coaster of some organizations who are looking for what a black man has to say about poverty, racism, in and out of Cleveland, and other organizations tend to want pictures of birds and trees and flowers, and not to make any kind of political statement, which ultimately created a ton of frustration. Me and 3 really close friends of mine decided to start a group that we assembled as a circle, which is an approach for us to kind of unbrainwash ourselves from everything that we've been taught not to say. And I think that's the entrepreneurial approach we're speaking of. And a lot of the ideas that we're talking about and coming up with is to almost in protest for some of the systems that are in place around art in Cleveland. And one of those things that I noticed more than anything is, as a kid, I went to Cleveland School of the Arts. I've been in the art scene in Cleveland for a very, very long time, observing a lot of artwork that didn't speak to me or anybody that I saw on a regular basis. And now I'm an adult, and I feel like when I do have an opportunity to have a show and exhibit my work, no matter what the content is, nobody who looks like me are there. I feel like my neighbor isn't getting promoted to, and neither is my mom. So ultimately, this small group of artists are going to approach art education and exhibiting and showcasing and voicing our opinion and our work in non-conventional ways that won't necessarily include the galleries and the institutions that are looking to showcase what people are actually going to buy based on their opinion of what people are going to buy.
So Councilman, you've said on many occasions that you've kind of taken your neighborhood and you've used arts and culture as an economic engine. So how can you take that beyond the infancy, but then how also can you embrace artists like Donald and Olga to be involved in that?
All right, for the sake of full disclosure, I'm a frustrated artist serving in public life as a council member. As a preteen, I was in many productions of the West Side Community Theater, which was a precursor to Near West Theater. Then as a teenager, I was a drummer in a band, in a high school band, and that wasn't cool enough for me. So 30 years ago, I formed the Project 5 breakdancing group, and I'm the only elected official who can do windmills. So, no, I've always been passionate about the arts and the love for arts. And the reason, quite frankly, why I ran for city council is my wife and I were making a major investment. We were building a house 13 years ago, and we couldn't afford what we were building, and I was watching this neighborhood that I was born and raised in deteriorate. And my wife really said, well, you can complain and you can do something about it. And I'm thinking about what Barbara Robinson said to us earlier today. There's always needs to be a nudge, somebody who's going to push government to do the right thing. So I decided to be that nudge, and I ran for council and was successful. One of the first things that I did is I was aware that there was this movement. There was a nudge who sat next door to me, Tom Shortville, who was talking with some of my colleagues who I work very closely with. We're going to go after trying to obtain some capital dollars from the state. So they formed this, what's called the West Side Arts Consortium. And it kind of evolved and morphed into what was the Gordon's Arts District. Shortly thereafter, I led some facilitated community conversations with key stakeholders, residents, business owners, institutions, about very aspirationally, how can we reinvigorate Detroit Avenue? And it's a pretty good blueprint, and I like to think Waterloo's our sister neighborhood, and you're going to hear Brian talk about, and they use, a similar blueprint with just a little different slant, where we try to infuse the experience of the main thoroughfare of Detroit Avenue. So we were able to, through this planning session, come up with this concept that we don't have a strong retail. We don't have an anchor tenant like the West Side Market that's bringing 1 million people here. But what we do have, unlike any other neighborhood in Northeast Ohio, is we have community-based performance arts. We have Cleveland Public Theater that James Vinton, Gamble came into our neighborhood in 1982. We knew Near West Theater wanted to relocate. They were looking heavily in our neighborhood. We had this whole movie theater with a hole in the roof, with water coming in. We just figured out how to fund it. Gosh, we could have a really cool movie theater. So quickly we formed what is known now today as the Portage Arts District. So I worked heavily to try to get a lot of public sector dollars, and we were able to be very successful. We've just reached our $30 million goal. That basically did 5 things. It infused life into the streetscape, right? The city was on board, and when we hired the engineering firm and the architects to design it, it was really important to our community that we had an environmental artist work at the onset. So when you walk that streetscape, it's infused with art. Susie Frazier was the artist. Land Studio was really wonderful and helped us secure a grant that we engaged Susie to design this streetscape. We didn't want Mayberry RFD, right? We wanted it to be funky, cool, and hip, and unlike any other experience you've ever been to. And so we were able to do that, raise money among these organizations to build a new theater for Near West, renovate the Capitol Theater, and modernize Cleveland Public Theater. Put a plug, they have the best party of the year tonight, Pandemonium. It's crazy at Cleveland Public Theater. But as a result of that, to Robert's question, what had happened then is the spin-off economic development. People saw that the public sector was involved, they had skin in the game, so now the private sector started to follow. And we've been very selective because one of the things that, I'm the second youngest of 9. I was only 11 when my dad passed away, and the most money my mother ever made, people think, oh, as long as you're rich. The most money my mother ever made was $28,000. She's proud of that. And so we just came from a very modest family. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't gentrify the neighborhood and we pushed the artist out of the community. We've done about $40 million of historic tax credit projects along Detroit Avenue. The very first artist in workspace in the city of Cleveland is at West 75th of Detroit, the City Savings and Loan Building. And we want to make sure that artists can still live affordably in that neighborhood and do their craft. And to date, we have about $1 billion worth of economic development activity, and that's directly related to this arts community. So how do we get people like Donald and Olga more involved in our community? Everything that we do, we try to look through an artistic lens. Originality is, I believe, the direct correlation to longevity. We don't want to fizzle out, and it would be easy now, right, for us to have a Starbucks or the Gap store coming to our community. It's not going to happen. We're not going to allow it. And every time we have an opportunity to fuse art, we want to engage the local arts scene. I could go on, and I know I'll be able to respond to maybe some of the questions that come, but people like Olga and Donald are the future of Cleveland, and we need to uplift them and support them, and we're prepared to do it at the government level.
Thank you. Now, Olga, not to steal you away from a current neighborhood that you're engaged in, you're working on an exciting project in a sister neighborhood to Gordon Square, and that's Tremont. Maybe you can tell us about the project and how the neighborhood has embraced you, or not necessarily know how to interact with you, but how it's evolved.
Well, the project is complete. There's an image of it. It's called Dendrite. It's on the corner of West 10th and Professor. And I was actually approached by Land Studio to come up with an idea, and they ended up selecting it. And so installed last December 2015. And it was, I guess, with a lot of my work, my public art projects, I like to involve the community because I think public art is something that is, as a term, public. So I think just as somebody in the public and seeing work appear in the city all of a sudden and kind of wondering, how did that happen? Who decided? As an artist, I like to sort of involve the community directly, somehow find a way to engage them so that they're aware of the new work that's going to be happening. So with Deadwood specifically, I ended up approaching or talking to, I worked with Tremont Development Corporation, and then talked to them about my interest in somehow involving the community and talking about maybe like working on the piece actually in Tremont, and if they could find some space for me to work on the piece there. So they did, and this was with Prosper for Purpose, who were so generous to donate a wonderful space for me to work on dendrite. And I had an open studio for the public and big banner, and I was there daily and just wanted kind of the input of the public. And I just think it's so important because as an artist, for me, I make work. What motivates me personally is not sort of thinking of, talking to other artists to sort of the art world. For me, art making, it should be something that is universal, accessible, and I'm thinking about sort of the general public, that specific neighborhood. So for me, it's very meaningful to directly involve myself and think of them and want to bring them into the process. So I guess that's kind of the lead up to that. And then it was just interesting installing the work. And I guess that day, it's a big event and they're seeing, me there orchestrating a big head getting lowered into a space with a tree and, I'm like, what's that girl doing? And so I ended up getting to talk to a lot of the people in the community. And I guess that day I realized how sort of polarizing the project was and kind of how controversial, and I had no idea at all. But then I really I liked the sort of honesty I wanted to hear kind of all kinds of input. And one of my favorite stories is a guy probably like in his like 20s, like mid-20s, like family generation upon generation, lived in Tremont, and just like was watching, the process. He was standing there, and I kind of looked over at him, and I was like, "Oh, how are you doing? Like, I'm an artist. What do you think?" And he's like, "I hate it." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Well, like why? What he tell me like what you're thinking?" And so he ended up actually kind of talking more about the streetscapes project, the history of Tremont, him growing up, kind of what the neighborhood was like, how it's changing. And for me, this is all this great information for me to hear. And sort of, we just got to talking, and I ended up, sort of engaging with him probably for about like 20 minutes, half an hour. Ended up sort of coming back around to talk about the work, me getting a chance to sort of talk about, what the sort of my inspiration behind it and my thoughts in making it. And, he ended up looking at me at the end of the conversation. He's like, "I like it." So for me, that's a great kind of, shows the arc of, and for me as like a public artist, I think it's so crucial to be brought in early on. I wish I had gotten the chance to get engaged with the community even more directly from the get-go, because to hear all of their sort of thoughts specifically about what's the history to this type of people, to this type of people, where do they see, the community kind of changing. So, and so that's where I feel really lucky right now. I'm doing a public art piece for the city of Columbus, and they're, with the Ohio Arts Council, they're really progressive there, and I'm being brought in on a public art project working with the city from the very beginning. So the streetscape hasn't even been designed. So I'm going to be working with landscape architects, with city officials, so I'm extremely excited. Because it's one of those things that, had I known more about the project, there are certain things that I would have changed. I would have loved to have that been a green area with the head sitting within, a circle of grass as opposed to cement, because there's just different things. Like right now, it's like this awesome skating ramp, I guess I figured out for like the skaters in the area, and they have this ability. But had I put grass around it, and it also for me meaningful to what the piece is about, but also from a functional standpoint, you know, we could have deterred certain types of like kind of use, because it is meant to be sort of sat upon, and it, you know, kind of wanted to create like a nook, this kind of place that would draw people. And the greenery would have been an enhancement that would have just, and I just could see little kids sitting down and playing. So when, you know, the gentleman, the 20-something-year-old talked about, we used to play over there, and now where are we gonna, you know, where are the kids gonna play? It's sort of like taking in that input and then finding a way to kind of work everything together and then give them what they want. So this could have been kind of a new place for the kids to play, which I know still is, which very good is for skateboarders. So.
Thank you. Brian, I want to talk to you for a little bit. A lot of excitement that's going on in Collinwood, and I think a lot of people think it's just happened, but you've worked very hard over the last 10 years or so, kind of under the radar. And now, with the streetscape and working with some of the arts institutions that are coming into your neighborhood, along with some entrepreneurs and artists, what kind of lessons, maybe you've benefited from this, but what kind of lessons have you learned from like watching what's going on in Tremont or Gordon Square? But then what differentiates the Collinwood neighborhood from these other neighborhoods?
So, you know, I'm Brian Friedman, the executive director of Northeast Shores, which in case you haven't been to Collinwood, although I see a lot of residents and gallery owners here. And Amy Callahan, executive director of Modern Arts, should be up here sitting. You know, one of the things that, so if you haven't been there, it's 12 minutes east on I-90 from right here, right now. It's just a short drive. It's great to see so many of you that I've seen already venture to explore the neighborhood. For us, we have experienced a great swath of vacancy in our community. And we decided to change the lens to instead of looking at vacancy as a blighting negative influence, and actually look at it as an asset to develop the community differently and through the arts. So for us, we're convinced that what we're doing in our neighborhood is about the artist, and the artist being the end and final goal. So in some communities, artists are the gentrification point, not just here in Cleveland, but also nationally. Artists come in, they make a neighborhood safe. Other people come in, because now it's safe, and then they're priced out. For us, all the artists that we work with are given the right to a deed. So they either buy the property off right at the initial offset, or we know how they're going to get a deed. So if at some point the neighborhood transitions and they want to leave, that positive capital that is now developed in the neighborhood, that's theirs. And we did that deliberately to differentiate ourselves from the other arts initiatives going on in Cleveland, because there's a lot of them going on. And we want to make sure that it was clear to the artist community that our intent is that we're not using the artist as a catalyst. The artist is the intent. And thankfully, by working with Community Partnership for Arts and Culture on a project that just completed in December, that actually resonated not just locally, but also nationally, where we have had, across the country, over 400 people inquire about how they can own in Collinwood, and over 100 of them have actually done that. They're all moving into post-foreclosure vacant houses. There's displacement that has occurred to allow them to move in, happened not by my hands, but by the forces of national economic crisis. And we're very jazzed about them coming in. But for us, it's actually twofold, and this is something that I'm really proud of the work that we did with Tom, is it's not just about having the artists come in and live in their own life. And it's really very aggressively about artist engagement. So we've done a couple experiments. We have another one we're trying to fundraise to do, which is around having artists actually engage with the community around things that help the neighborhood. So our first experiment that we did at CDAC is we researched in the neighborhood what their high primary concerns were about the community, and then we invited artists to propose projects that address those concerns directly. And they didn't necessarily have to live in the neighborhood or not. They did. But they had to address these concerns the neighborhood brought up, and then neighborhood residents helped that who should be selected. The experiment that we're actually completing now is opposite for streetscape that is very disruptive. We've asked merchants to propose with artists projects that will maintain vibrancy through a very disruptive construction process. And those were first come, first served. So, you know, the primary goal wasn't necessarily, obviously, about artist excellency. It was really about community engagement and vibrancy and making sure that so many people come out during a very disruptive but exciting time in our history. The third experiment that we're hoping to do is actually have democratic voting about which artist projects should proceed in the actual fabric of the residential neighborhood next. We're currently fundraising around that. And the intent of each of those is to make sure that there's deliberate artist engagement throughout the process. When we have our block watch meetings and 50, 60 people come, and some of them happen to be artists, they're coming as neighbors. When I open a new charter school, excellent charter school, I have artists as parents. It's not this little group of people that have meetings that the rest of the neighborhood's like, well, that's something we're on. We try to make sure it's as ingrained as possible in what is frankly a very diverse neighborhood. It has a lot of diversity both income-wise as well as racially, and we're trying to make sure that we kind of knit that place-making element through all of that. So that's what we've been trying to do to really make sure that the value is held at the artist level, but we also see them in all the different roles that they serve in our community as shoppers, voters, characters, community residents, etc.
As your streetscape concludes, are you going to continue to have the merchants interact with artists in this kind of advocacy excellence program, or are you switching something a little bit?
Well, the merchants on that district, approximately a dozen of them, are either nonprofit organizations or galleries or record stores right now. And we have 5 more under construction or have selected space. So for us, many of you have heard probably because of the positive information that we're going to get some restaurants soon. Well, right now, for every restaurant that you hear being announced, there's at least 2 arts-based things that are moving in opposite that. We hope to maintain that ratio going forward so it continues to be an authentic arts-based community.
Thank you. So Tiffany, not to leave you for that, but Land Studio has, in its many different names over many years, has been integral in working in the neighborhoods and downtown Cleveland, in public and private developments, working with artists and sculpture, murals, fencing, even some bus stops. What's next? How can you help bridge these neighborhoods that are promoting art and kind of talk about maybe what Kathleen mentioned earlier, is that we don't have one district, we have many places to go. How can we bridge that?
Well, for Land Studio, there's a couple things coming up next that directly address this. And just Land Studio, for the audience, is a 3-year-old organization that is the result of a merger between Cleveland Public Art and Parkworks. So we haven't changed our name that many times. But we work at really large civic scales. We're responsible right now for the redesign of Public Square, and we'll be managing that construction process. And when Kathleen was talking earlier, and Barbara, about the importance of a healthy downtown, a really vibrant and activated public square is going to be a really critical building block within making downtown a place that is vibrant and exciting. And the better downtown does, the better the region does, is something we absolutely see the data in. We are in the works of developing an annual public art program to take place on Public Square and the newly redesigned malls, which are above the convention center. So looking at the way that the arts are not only something that you see once, we see a lot of value in these changing temporary spaces because you go down to see the space, but then you keep going back because you want to see what type of work artists are doing to infuse that and change it all the time. Cleveland Public Library has been an amazing partner for us for the past 5 or 6 years now, doing a temporary annual public art program in their reading garden. Donald Black was actually the second or third artist to work on that program with us. And it's been a really great way to get the ideas of artists in spaces that people are already using. We have a long history of working in Cleveland's neighborhoods, and I think while I'm talking about this work that we're doing in downtown, it's really just part of what we do. Our work in the neighborhoods is really critical to our mission. The N in land stands for neighborhoods, the name is an acronym. So it's really critical to who we are and what we do, and neighborhood work is a way to connect with the community, a way to connect with artists. And one of the things that we really love about neighborhood-based projects is, I'm sure anybody on this panel can talk about, the public art that happens in neighborhoods ends up really reflecting the spirit of a community. So it's very different for every neighborhood, and so it makes perfect sense that Waterloo feels different from Gordon Square, which feels different from Tremont. It has to be that way because each neighborhood has its own history and its own story, and we work very hard to help that story come out. The things that we're doing right now that seems to be really critical to us going forward is the recognition that there's so many great spaces in Cleveland. Right now, we're looking very closely at how to connect neighborhoods to each other, blur the boundaries a little bit more between these neighborhoods. And then also using trails and other off-road systems as a way of encouraging alternative transportation, but also using green space and the arts as a way of creating linkages with the neighborhoods and creating spaces that people want to see along the way. So it doesn't have to feel like there's a big dead zone between Gordon Square and Ohio City. Right now, Detroit Avenue is really blending the neighborhoods into each other, and there is a hope that that could happen all the way down Detroit Avenue into Lakewood, and even in beyond, to make these really interesting longer spaces that people can travel and walk along in. Just make it a more interesting, longer experience overall. So I think that the connections is kind of one of the things that we're really focused on right now. And using artists, as Olga was saying, on that design level, instead of saying, oh, we've identified this really great spot for you, now go put a sculpture there, is how do you evolve this art program from something where they're coming in at the end to be more integrated. And I think that a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about throughout the morning is about our arts community becoming a little bit more sophisticated. It's not just sort of this grassroots groups anymore. It's much more professionalized and thinking more and more clearly about how to make it part of an overall approach to our processes and our city systems instead of a piecemeal piece of work.
Robert, if I could, Tiffany made a very powerful statement that I just want to underscore. We have in the city of Cleveland 36 distinct neighborhoods, and each of these neighborhoods work very, I think, well with one another. We don't want any one neighborhood to kind of just be blended or morph into another neighborhood, but the reference that Tiffany mentioned about Ohio City and Detroit showing, there's a real concerted effort between those two communities looking at that main thoroughfare, Detroit Avenue, and how can we strengthen that corridor. And one of the things that we have just finished with our $30 million capital campaign is we've engaged NKSK, an architectural firm out of Columbus, as well as Westlake Reed and Southby. We're doing a comprehensive master planning process that's happening right now that, in addition to the physical space in that neighborhood, they're also looking at linkages to other communities. So there's an online viral form that you can participate for those who are interested. It's just gsad.mindmixer.com, gsad.mindmixer.com. And you'll see everything infused in that online form is with an arts-centric focus. There's going to be a major opportunity right at 45th in Detroit when the United States High School closes down. That could be the catalytic project that now starts to create this rhythm between these two districts, so it's not so scary to get on one little street and walk all the way down to the other. And I know Brian probably works with adjoining neighborhoods. The Waterloo neighborhoods is a sub-neighborhood of the greater neighborhood that Brian oversees. But this is happening all across Cleveland, and it's happening through the arts.
Thank you. Tom, the vision of CPAC is to strengthen, or mission is to strengthen, unify, and connect Greater Cleveland arts and culture sector. And for the most part, the art and culture sector, pretty much, we all know each other, we all interact. How do we take that and cross these neighborhoods and get to the general public? I mean, it's, you know, how do we get more exposure to these folks like Old and Donald and just into the neighborhood? I mean, people are still a little bit isolated.
Well, I think it is a collaboration. It's not just the arts and cultural sector that needs to get more exposure for itself. It's the arts and cultural sector and the other sectors that exist within those neighborhoods working together. And I think one of the examples that I would put forward is arts education. And arts education in school, public and private schools, is extremely important. However, arts education continues to be not the most important subject matter in various types of educational approaches, whether it's STEM, Common Core, or whatever new protocol for education is. So one of the things that I think would certainly benefit the arts and cultural sector at the same time being partners with educators and being partners within the neighborhoods is to really start to focus on community-based arts education. And what I mean by that is that the public schools are going to only be able to do what they can do. And there's a tremendous amount of policy that goes into what they have to do and have to perform. If you take a look at the Cleveland Plain Dealer this morning and you open it up and see the list of how all the schools in Cuyahoga County have been ranked, it's clear that public education is very different than when it was when I was in public education as a young child many years ago. So, and I'll give an example of both of my colleagues here who are from the neighborhood. If you look at Near West Theater and if you look at Cleveland Public Theater, they are certainly at the top of their game when it comes to theater. But there are also arts and cultural organizations that understand the artists that work with them are also important when it comes to educating the community. And so the arts education programs that Near West Theater and CPT provide are something that the public educational system is not going to be able to provide, not at that level, not at that depth, not at that intensity, and not at that quality. Arts Collingwood, another example. Arts Collingwood has a gallery. They bring in artists from outside of the neighborhood as well as inside the neighborhood. They have a very specific arts education program. Yes, it's after school, and yes, it is on the weekends. But I will make an analogy here. This goes back to when I was very, very, very young. The professional sports teams early on understood that they needed to develop fans, and that not everybody was going to enjoy baseball, football, basketball, soccer. And so what do? They developed Little League and Pop Warner football. And soccer teams and weekend basketball teams. I was in Pop Warner football. I thought I was going to be a tight end. I got tight, but I never made the tight end a part of it. But it helped me understand the whole sports thing. I absolutely believe if we approach arts education on a level that is approachable to the children in the neighborhoods of Cleveland, that what Gold is doing, what any artist is doing, and what Don was trying to communicate in terms of his vision, then becomes part of the fabric of Cleveland's neighborhood, and not something that's a second thought. So, a lot of times I just hear people say, I know what I like and I don't like that. What are they saying? I like what I know and I don't understand that. And so let's make sure that if we do believe in individual artists and the quality of the work that they do and the diversity of the work that they do and the arts and cultural organizations that they're associated with, let's support them through a different approach that could certainly be supported with public sector funding at the local level into the city of Cleveland. He will never speak to me after this meeting again. But let's don't do the same thing over and over and over again, because that's not the solution here. The solution is we're working together to make sure that arts education is infused in each of those 36 neighborhoods through you and us.
So who educates those art students?
Who educates them?
Yes, is that Cleveland Public School System responsibility, or is that a neighborhood responsibility?
I think we look at public sector funding and private sector funding. You know, we like to say we have public-private partnerships in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. We do. But let's make sure that arts education isn't a private-private partnership.
So let me ask Tiffany. Tiffany, can you comment on? Yeah.
To the question of who should educate kids, I'm the guy that likes to talk about race. I like to talk about being black, and I like to talk about the fact I'm in an environment when I'm an artist that's predominantly white. I feel like people who can, black or white, relate to the kids, artists or non-artists, who have an investment beyond satisfying the number or the seat or getting someone to graduate, or the goal is so they can function. You know, I feel like the people who educate kids are people in and out of the community that really care about like people in education. But in terms of high quality art education, I feel like it's the artists who have the ability who can do that in and out of the community with a greater investment than being a high profile ladies.
Donald, I think to piggyback off of that, it sets a really great example for kids in a neighborhood to see people who look like them doing work that they may not ever think is possible for them. We did a project a couple of years ago at Harvey Rice School over in the Buckeye neighborhood, and it was a series of mosaic seating around the Rice branch of the Cleveland Public Library and by the new K-8 Harvey Rice School. And it was designed by an African-American artist named Martha Jackson Jarvis, and it had to be installed on site over the course of 3 weeks. And it was Martha and her sister and her daughter, and they were there working at that school for about 12 hours a day. They were there when the kids came in the morning, they were there when the kids left. And one of the most amazing parts of that project for me was hearing all of these girls walking up to these women who were in overalls and hard hats and holding torches and holding tools and all of these things that they had just never been exposed to. And there were girls saying, I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't know that this is what being an artist might look like. And it was just a really empowering, I think it was great for the artists, but it was great for the school and for the library to have these young children getting a chance to see that there's jobs out there that they didn't know existed and that they could have them if they want them. That's where their talents are.
Matt, you were going to add something?
I was going to just ask Tiffany to comment. Tom was talking about, to Robert's question about, who should be doing this public-private partnership. Each year I allot a certain amount of funding that I have some discretion over to Land Studio. And last night, where I was at? I was at Baltic's Children's Park watching Sandlot. We were showing a movie in the park. Tiffany's organization, though, if you could speak a little bit about the art program that you're doing in the parks.
Sure. We do park programming in 10 different City of Cleveland neighborhoods in several different parks over the course of the summer. It's targeted at kids, typically when they would be looking for things to do during the school day. And we work with local artists and local arts organizations, Progressive Arts Alliance, the Rainey Institute, several individual artists, to provide free programs to kids in the city's neighborhoods throughout the summer. I think that we work with maybe 3,000 children every summer. This is not including their repeat children probably at different programs, but it's led by artists, and then it's promoted within the community that they're taking place in. And often there is a small job over in Matt's neighborhood. There's usually a couple of kids who end up getting paid to promote the events, make sure their friends come help us set up and take down. And it's just a really lovely, relatively inexpensive way to get programming in the city's neighborhoods that is, the schools can't do everything, and I think it's up to us as a community to help fill those gaps and reach out to kids who have this interest but they're not able to indulge in it during the school day as much as they'd like.
Thank you. Besides the art education that we can really enhance, where do you see the voids in the neighborhood that we can actually try to be a little more experimental or a little more aggressive, or introduce something that maybe we just haven't gotten around to?
Well, one of the things that I'm passionate about is increasing the audience. So there's a lot of people that live in Northeast Ohio, and a lot of them still don't know how to engage in all the art programming that's going on. It's amazing the blessing that we have in Cleveland and how much is going on every single day. But the audience is not growing as quickly as the programming is developing. And I feel like there's a real lack of, community guilt that we put on people that live in suburbs and other parts of our community. They don't know how to access what we're doing. I think we don't have a good communal message that we're telling them. And we don't have, Positively Cleveland or the other organizations really deciding that a big chunk of what could increase visitation in these neighborhoods is right now sitting at home watching TV. And they really could be easily brought out if we could make it more accessible and more obvious on how to do that. I find it challenging from my position because, I only have so many resources and I have to be very focused on my community because that's where I'm supposed to spend my money. So I'm constantly looking for partners that can kind of gravitate that message to really make it clear. One of the analogies that Tom should have used before is, if you live in New Orleans and or one of the suburbs in New Orleans and you didn't hear jazz for a year, you feel bad about yourself. You did something wrong. You didn't hear live jazz for a year. It's obviously easily possible to go to work in some suburban New Orleans and go home and you could avoid it. But you did something wrong if you didn't hear live saxophone for 12 straight months. Now obviously we're visual art and performing art, here today's discussion. We need to make it that if you didn't hear live guitar or live music performance or a visual performance, like you did something wrong as a Northeast Ohio resident, that you really should go out. We are really that excited about what's going on. You need to make people feel bad that the only time they may come into the city, seriously, the only time they come to the city is to see a Browns or Indians game, right? That we need to make it just more approachable and we can increase that audience.
Very good point. We have a lot of shy people today. No one has any questions for this panel? Can you come up to the microphone, please?
So as he's walking up, let me just add, the casual arts, the unintended experience is something that we can do better. One of the things that I'm trying to do in the neighborhood I represent is we create opportunities where we have artists, just whether they're performing artists, whether they're jugglers, stilt walkers, or musicians. On a Thursday night, you might walk in our district and see a little three-piece band just on the street corner, just playing music to just change the whole ambiance. And that's something simple that we could do in all of our communities.
Kind of answered the question I had. I wondered when you said about the community build, that's something that I've been thinking about a long time. And are there any like concrete, do you have any concrete plans as far as causing that guilt where people come more than just for an event, make them understand these other neighborhoods that we've been talking about, like Colin, because when people hear, you know, that live in these other suburbs, when people hear Colin, they can think of negative things right away. And, you know, obviously that's not all it's about. And when they think of these other places like Gordon Art District, they know very little about it. Capitol Theater is the first thing to think about, and after that, we have to think a little harder. And there's so much stuff in these neighborhoods that people really need to know.
So, at least in our neighborhood, one of the things that we've been working very hard on is actually getting art into the public space, but not necessarily public art, right? So it's having a pop-up concert, it's having a pop-up park, it's having a vacant lot reused with a sculpture for a temporary period of time, just to keep the engagement going on with the community and to make sure people are aware when they pass through the neighborhood as either active residents or visitors, this is an art space community that they want to grow in. I'm a little bit more hard pressed to have the resources to tell Mentor to get in the freeway and come see the neighborhood their grandparents left. That's one of the things that I'm looking for more partners with, and I frankly think there should be a bigger call to action. So, I could come to those meetings, but with the resources we have, it's just difficult for me to do a mass mailing to Hampton. I want to, but I also have to make sure I tell the 17,000 people in town what we're doing too. So on my wish list, I just wish it was, in a regional dialogue and citywide dialogue is something more that was occurring.
Brian, you've also been the home to a pop-up office for a pretty supportive organization over the last 55 years, and that's the Cleveland Arts Prize. So I think that's a very gracious offer that you've made for the neighborhood and for the organization. And just for a small plug for that organization, after the first of the year, nominations will be open, and that's one way you can support artists, and that's always from the public. So your help is greatly needed in getting a lot of these artists recognized. So.
My name is Linda Zoltenwood, and I'm part of the Friends Committee. So I found out about a lot of great information through CPAC in the past. And could we use CPAC and maybe Positive in Cleveland and do some kind of passport program where if you have incentives to go to all these different little neighborhoods, maybe the art museum can donate a membership to if you get enough of your passport stamp or somehow give incentives to neighborhoods that you could do so. But also there's little things like neighborhood connections, which is open to art ideas. All these different neighborhoods and neighborhood connections, there's something called Neighbor Up, and if you're not even a grant recipient yet, you can just go and check it out, go network with different neighborhoods and see what the projects are doing. You can go connect with them before you even are confident enough to apply for a grant. So there's all these great connectors of the neighborhoods that do exist. So, yeah, and then also another one, if you don't know about the Sustainability Summit coming up this week, it's very inexpensive and there's scholarships for volunteers. And it's a way to get, especially artists who are interested in environmental issues, to come and be a part of the conversation to make the kind of more sustainable place. So, thanks a lot.
Hello, my name is Tiffany Paul, and I'm a local artist in Cleveland. And I really appreciate you guys coming together and putting this presentation together, because it lets me know that our community is taking art serious and are doing things. My problem is that I'm in Bedford Heights, which is an outskirts suburb, and the great things that you guys are doing here in Cleveland isn't really rolling over to the Bedford Heights area. It's actually really quiet when it comes to art and involvement in culture in Bedford Heights. And I just would like to know if there are any initiative or anything going on to bring that to the suburban area, or is there any way me as an individual artist can be more involved?
Yes.
Thank
Thank you for that question, because it's something I think is extremely important for Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. And yes, individual artists can be involved in promoting art and culture in their particular neighborhood or their particular suburb. One of the things that we heard early on when CPAC was formed, we would get calls from different leadership people in different neighborhoods and communities, and they would say, can you help us be like tree moms? And we would say, you don't want to be like tree moms. And they said, why? Because you have your own arts and cultural core in your neighborhood. Every 36 neighborhoods has individual artists and arts and cultural programs going on. The important thing is to meet with your elected officials and begin to define what that is through community dialogue and beginning to then build off of that information and promotion about your neighborhood. If you look at, when we were here, when CPAC was started in '97, there was about 9 arts and cultural districts. Today there are 14. And of those 14, they are each uniquely connected with their neighborhood. So I would urge you to sit down with whoever's the community development director in Bedford Heights, the mayor, your council person, and you probably already know what's going on in terms of individual artists in your neighborhood, and start to help them understand the uniqueness of arts and culture in Bedford Heights.
And I want to also, want to plug the fact, Tom did not bring up that a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, there was a research paper that his organization did called Putting Artists on the Map, which actually did a very thorough job of determining where artists were throughout Northeast Ohio, not just in Cleveland neighborhoods, and why. So interviewing a lot of artists about why they were agglomerating in various neighborhoods and why, and to provide hints to communities where there isn't a massive agglomeration to suggest you have the right homes, you have the right things, artists and mass artists, the community would need for them to want to be connected, which I think was very informative for some communities that are trying to grow their own arts. The other question you asked is how can you get engaged outside of Bedford Heights? We, as well as most of the CDCs, would welcome outside artists to participate in what we're doing. Admittedly, sometimes we have financial incentives that if you happen to live or work in our neighborhood, we'll pay a little bit more, but we do believe that every artist should get paid. You guys are making a living. It's not something we're asking you to do on your generosity of your heart. So either see me or Lincoln, if you could raise your hand afterwards, and we'll get your contact information and make sure that we let you know about upcoming opportunities. And I will warn you, based on our previous experience, once we start to engage you, you will move. You will So I just want to warn you now. You can start packing after you start talking to Lincoln. That's how it's been working out so far. But which we're very excited about. But it starts, you don't know us, we don't know you. Once you get to know us, a lot of people have found they want to get really involved.
Okay. I want to add one more thing. I also think that your local library can be an amazing resource for this. I see Jim Crawford from Lakewood Public Library out there. And libraries are looking for ways to engage people, and if there is maybe programming opportunities that you can see, or a way to connect with people in these spaces which are free and open to the public by their nature, it could be a nice way for you to break in maybe at a level that maybe feels slightly more accessible to calling your mayor on Monday, which I fully encourage you to do, but sometimes it might feel easier to start at maybe a level that feels more accessible.
Well, I guess what I'll mention is I've already done a mural in the Beverly Heights area, so I kind of already know what to do, how to go about doing it. So I know Mayor Fletcher personally, but it's just, that's how it is.
And I don't think that you were here when I said earlier, I work for Land Studio, and we're always looking for new local artists to be working with, and I would encourage you to send me an email and kind of show us what you're doing. The more work we know that local artists are doing, the more we can fund them into various projects. Yeah. Thank you.
Kathleen?
Thanks. So as I started out being a little bit provocative this morning, I'll continue. What I hear is a lot of challenge around communication, letting people know what's going on, helping them figure out how to be involved. And it is true that each of the CDCs in the area, each of the organizations in the area can't take on that communication role. CPAC does a terrific job in talking to those individuals who know what CPAC is, and the arts community certainly does. But that's not what we're talking about here. How do we get the word beyond that? And so my question, it's really an open-ended question, who's responsible for that? Where could that happen in a way? The Positively Cleveland has been brought up a couple of times. Their job really is to communicate what's going on to folks outside of Cleveland, to bring people in for tourism purposes. The fact that they don't promote the arts as a major tourism attraction and asset in the community is, I think, a shame. But what is the mechanism? Where could that live within our community to bring in people from the suburbs, to let the folks who don't know about what's going on in the arts and cultural world know so that they could participate? As a poet, now, I could go to 5 different poetry readings tonight. The only people that know about that are the poets, and they all show up, and that's wonderful. But where is the community calendar for the arts? Where is it that ordinary people can go if they want to find something artistic to do with their family on the weekend? I think that's another missing piece here. And I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I did want it to get it into the conversation since there's so much talk about communication.
And I do want to say something, in support or defense of Positively Cleveland for a minute, because it's really easy for us, to not really defend themselves, to decide like that's where it should land. But the Positively Cleveland gets paid out of the bed tax. That's how it works. We'll stay in a hotel room, pay their bill, Positively Cleveland get paid. If we convince somebody to come visit us from Solon, we're probably going to go sleep in their bed tonight, right? So Positively Cleveland, when they do mass marketing campaigns in Pittsburgh, Detroit, Columbus, other peer neighborhoods where they consider a weekend trip or whatnot to go visit you, well, they're going to make a weekend trip, and they're going to stay in a hotel facility and pay the bills of Positively Cleveland. So I've been challenged by trying to figure out what the right vehicle is. It's just right now, unfortunately, it's easy to just label Positively Cleveland and then realize that really isn't, that's not the business. That's not their core, their business model. Yeah. Right.
Well, I could only comment for the city of Cleveland. Right now, there's an internal conversation going on around establishing a stronger arts and culture policy within the city of Cleveland. It's quietly happening. At some point, we're going to look forward to engaging the greater community, particularly the arts community around that. But I think this is something that the city of Cleveland, at least for our jurisdiction, should take a more active role, looking at other peer cities across the country who do a fabulous job at doing exactly that. So stay tuned, more to come. If you have opinions on that, call up this guy next to me. But we need more nudges, and you need to be speaking with people who you know who work in the city, whether they're council members or the mayor, about this needs to be a priority. And don't forget the fact that next year we have a levy coming up that has to be renewed. And those precious dollars we can go to hopefully establish something much wider outside of the city of Plymouth.
Can I say something real quick? I don't know, I've seen a lot of conversations about art and conversations similar to the one we're having now. And I'm listening and I'm hearing marketing strategies, whose responsibility. I think maybe we should take a look and go a little further back in terms of art and its ability to communicate. I think we should actually take into consideration that what we're showcasing and what the work is may be a part of the problem in a way where I was trying to teach somebody how to sell artwork, and he said, well, you put a price tag on it, why doesn't it sell? In a similar way that we can market and we can continue to market all the stuff that exists, but if we don't really evaluate what the art or the art education, what it's actually communicating, and who it's talking to, and who it's not talking to, and their understanding of the language when it's talking, then I think we're going to continue to run in a circle of, well, how do we engage this community? How do we engage this community? Well, we told them, we can force them, we can ask them, we can give them incentives, but what if we actually stimulated their mind a little more with what we are presenting? And kind of, in that whole term, if you build it, they will come. Maybe we haven't built it to the ability to where people are coming from the suburbs, people are coming from the inner city to see, to engage, to listen, to experience. I mean, if I wasn't, born into the art world of Cleveland as a kid, I would always feel like it's not really talking to me. So I wouldn't necessarily think that I should take my work there, because why would I think they would show my work? So maybe it's not a who needs to do what to, say that we did it and it's in the paper. Maybe it's, what are we creating and really evaluating.
Let me just add to that, because I think that
We're going to need to wrap up now, so
I think it's a very good point. Definitely, if you remember about 8 years ago, CPAC developed Culture for Me, which was a website that allowed all arts and cultural organizations to go on that website and to program it, and then anybody who wanted to find out what was going on in Cuyahoga County could go to that website. We did a marketing study afterwards to see how many people were coming to it, and there were about 3. Not sure that either of those 2 were kind of to it. I think what Don was saying, and I agree with this, there's plenty of information out there in terms of print and electronic what's going on in terms of art and cultural activities. I think when we say we need to do more marketing, we're looking at a symptom, we're not going to the cause. What's causing this? And I absolutely will go back to this idea. What are we doing to build fans? And if we're not building fans and we're not committed to do that generation after generation, we're going to have the same problems generation after generation.
I think that there's like a general disconnect from the average person to understanding kind of what art is and sort of like the application of it and like how in essence there's art all around us. And I don't think people in general want to make that connection, because when you talk about, the arts, when they go to see a performance, they know what a guitar does. They understand like what an actor does. But an artist, that's something so kind of mysterious and ephemeral, like, because the arts themselves can be anything, and it's very sort of conceptual. And it's just like me, and I guess that's why I always like to kind of directly engage the public, is because it gives me that opportunity to be in a hard hat, in my overalls, with my tools, and people can see the actual application of what I'm doing. When I was working on the Weston piece, I was still in the hotel finishing it up. And the level of people that I got to engage with, and it was literally all day, because I was there usually 8 to 10 hours a day working on it. And it was from the staff to like, high-end guests and the owners of the hotel itself, to kind of hear their feedback. And all of them, they all were asking the same questions. What is this? How is it made? So there's just sort of for me as an artist, it's like the more experience that I have to kind of show people how I make something, that immediately kind of activates their sort of like thought and interest in art, in my work, in kind of the ideas even behind the piece, because it's sort of like, how do we get across more the depth to what the arts are, as opposed to these kind of gimmicky kind of flash moments, where people actually are more, I guess it's sort of like, and I think people want to have conversations, so it's like, how do we create situations
That's a good segue, Olga.
Yeah.
I think this conversation is going to have to be picked up later. We've gone over our time, but please give everybody a warm thank you.
Whoever has more to say should say it on paper, should say it to ArtNEO so we can continue this conversation. I want to thank Robert Mashpee, who wasn't really introduced as an architect, but who is an architect in the community. We are all in the trenches together.
And we will reconvene at probably at 12:10. So for the third panel, which will be another opportunity to continue the conversation and have some snacks and whatnot, we'll see you back in a few minutes.